And here's how the president responded when he was asked if he underestimated ISIS to this point.
No, we haven't underestimated our abilities. This is precisely why we're in Iraq as we speak and why we're operating in Syria as we speak. And it's precisely why we have mobilized 65 countries to go after ISIL, and why I hosted at the United Nations an entire discussion of counterterrorism strategies and curbing the flow of foreign fighters, and why we've been putting pressure on those countries that have not been as robust as they need to in tracking the flow of foreign fighters in and out of Syria and Iraq.
But a look back at an interview the president did with the New Yorker in January of 2014 tells a different story. In the same interview in which he used the now infamous JV team analogy, President Obama went on to say, quote, "I think there is a distinction between the capacity and reach of a bin Laden and a network that is actively planning major terrorist plots against the homeland versus jihadists who are engaged in various local power struggles and disputes, often sectarian."
Local power struggles. Well, the reaction, obviously, to the president's remarks was pretty much the same across the ideological spectrum. Roger Cohen of the New York Times wrote, "Where was the anger in that President Obama press conference? I'm in Paris. His words fell shamefully short of sentiment here." The Washington Post editorial board wrote that a petulant-sounding President Obama insisted, as he has before, that critics have offered no concrete alternatives. The president would be wise to set aside his defensiveness and reconsider them. The Wall Street Journal writes, if Mr. Obama fought the Islamic State with half the vigor in which he delivers moral lectures, he'd find that a much less fearful America would welcome far more refugees. Charles Krauthammer said, there was lassitude, passivity, and annoyance in the president's voice. And Eugene Robinson writes, Obama's tone in addressing the Paris atrocity was all wrong. At times he was patronizing. At other times he seemed annoyed and almost offensive. Mika, it was shocking. And the reaction from the people I spoke with across the ideological divide and people that work for other governments that are on the front line in this battle find it shocking that what the French declare as an act of war, the president calls a setback. And what Dianne Feinstein says keeps her up at night.
Yeah, no, that was...
The president says, I'm too busy for that. I'm too busy for that. And he says people can pop off if they want to. He was peevish. He was petulant. Not my words. It's the Washington Post words. He was clearly irritated through the entire press conference. And I think most frightening is the fact that he seems disconnected from reality. The reality on the ground in Paris, the reality on the ground in Syria, the reality on the ground. He is the opposite of a neocon that is more wedded to his ideology than the realities on the ground. And he's taking the world along for a ride here.
So the news part of what you were saying right here, do we have the Dianne Feinstein bite ready to go? I'd like to play that because that really expresses sort of how this crosses all ideological divides on many levels. Take a look.
I've never been more concerned. I read the intelligence faithfully. ISIL is not contained. ISIL is expanding. They've just put out a video saying it is their intent to attack this country. And I think we have to be prepared. There's only one way we're going to diminish them, and that is by taking them out, because they are growing. They are in more than a dozen countries now. They are sophisticated. They have apps to communicate on that cannot be pierced, even with a court order. So they have a kind of secret way of being able to conduct operations and operational planning. So we should take this very, very seriously.
And I'll tell you, Willie, a lot of people in New York City, a lot of people very, very concerned at the president's passive response to Paris?
We had Commissioner Bill Bratton seated right there yesterday, and we gave him the comments from the White House that the ISIL doesn't have the capacity to reach the United States, and the look on his face said it all. He said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Of course this is very real. Of course this could happen here. Of course we need to be more aggressive. Of course we need to do more than we're doing right now." It's been a hallmark of President Obama's presidency and even his campaign to be cool, to show no emotion. But there are moments when people want to see a little emotion. There are moments when people want to hear him say, "I recognize this is a problem, here's what I'm going to do," and not to get mired in political fights. I know he was asked about critics of his program, but he seemed more emotional and annoyed and aggressive about that than he did about the problem in front of him.
And I heard that he was, the only time he ever showed passion was when he was attacking Republicans, not when he was talking about ISIS.
Now the question is,
bizarre.
Does that lack of emotion and passion match a lack of strategy? They are coordinating, the United States government is coordinating with France on these airstrikes. We are sharing intelligence. He's taking new measures, but is it enough? Is there a new strategy? And we just haven't heard that.
Mike Barnicle?
Well, I've been told by several people that the President of the United States has been told repeatedly over the past couple of months that the strategy that's being employed right now is not nearly as effective as he, the President, wants it to be or thinks it is. And this could have played a part in his reaction yesterday because now it is very clear that the strategy is not effective. You cannot defeat Daesh, ISIS, whatever you want to call them, with a bombing campaign. Cannot be done. They have to have people on the ground.
Even military men and women that we speak to say the bombing campaign is a joke. It's for show. What's so ironic about what he said yesterday, Mike, was he said, "I'm not going to do anything, but I'm too busy to pose." Yeah, his entire bombing campaign,
more than half,
he's posing through a bombing campaign.
More than half the planes that take off in our bombing campaign come back with the ordnance still.
Without dropping the bomb. Mark Halperin, it's baffling what happened yesterday, and the French are clearly disturbed by it. What's your take on the President's press conference and where the United States policy is and where it's going?
The country and the world only the President of the United States at a time, and that posture that he had yesterday is not going to satisfy large numbers of people on the planet, large numbers of people in the country, and as you suggested, Joe, not just Republicans, but a lot of Democrats. The President's a very rational guy. He's very frustrated by the options that he has. He's very frustrated by the criticism that he gets. But as Willie suggested, some others have suggested, there comes a time when the intellect and the black and white, the gray as opposed to the black and white, has to be put aside to say the world needs American leadership. And again, the performance yesterday, baffling, I think, is about the nicest thing you could say about it from the point of view of a lot of people who expected a much different approach.
Well, Gene, obviously the usual suspects, the Republicans were attacking, but also you have the French deeply concerned, Roger Cohen saying it was shameful, the Washington Post editorial board talking about calling the president, quote, petulant. That's the editorial board, as you know very well. And yesterday, it seems one more example of colossal failure on the part of Washington, D.C., from a Democratic president and some loons on the far right on immigrants. You had Michael Gerson, a Republican, actually attacking Republicans on the Washington Post editorial board, editorial page, talking about how their reaction is all wrong as well.
Well, you can say the U.S. reaction in general has been muddled, to say the least. You quoted from my column earlier in which I clearly said the president's tone was all wrong. He sounded defensive. He sounded annoyed at the whole thing, and one understands his annoyance, but that he shouldn't have projected that. That said, the substance of what he said is something we should also focus on, and he asked a very good question. What is the alternative policy? What is the realistic alternative policy that is going to have more of an impact on ISIS? And I think he confronts the central question, which is, are you going to send U.S. ground troops? And how many are we going to send? I have been told by people who really know and who follow this carefully, people in the region, that you're talking 30,000 to 40,000 minimum, ground troops, if you're going to, quote,